Governor Gavin Newsom knows that he cannot enforce the ban mask against ICE. This is all a joke, right? He doesn't actually have power. If you think that, you're absolutely wrong. And a lot of you don't know better because our ethics has been insufficient, and that is because it's complex and there's a lot of gaps, right? That you need to utilize interdisciplinary knowledge in order to fill those. Thankfully, I have political science, I have American constitutionalism, and I have international law, and obviously that historical perspective. In that recognition of going through our fundamental texts, including the Federalist Papers, the Constitution, and John Locke, a lot of those relevant texts, we have an understanding of the hierarchy of constitutional supremacy. Now, what you hear is that the federal is about the state. That is a part of it. But constitutional supremacy, particularly guided through Federal 78 through 83, which gives the authority to the judiciary in general, because Article 3 is incomplete. So saying that this doesn't count is to say that the courts don't have authority, right? So in that recognition, constitutional supremacy is the constitution above all, including the branches, including the federal, including the state, including democracy. So if there is a candidate who won the Democratic vote, and if there is a provision that has enforcement that they are not qualified, the Constitution is supreme to the Democratic vote. The fact that we don't have this is because the Congress and the courts said, well, we're not the ones who's going to do it, right? So in that recognition, we must acknowledge that what political tradition has told us was America, like the fact that we are founded on freedom, is not true, because freedom is unconditional. And Federalist 2 by John Jay actually says that in order for the government, for the federal government, to be capable of meeting the demands and responsibilities that we position under the Constitution, the people need to give over some of our natural rights in order for them to be capable of governing, right? That means that our rights are conditional to the contract, which means that there is a high threshold of regulation, but we are founded on liberty, which can be regulated upon that threshold, right? Which is a high threshold. But ultimately, we do not have a absolute democracy and absolute libertarianism, absolute socialism, absolute anything, because our founding fathers' position, anything too extreme is tyranny. Any power that is in balance leads to tyranny. The constellation of powers they position, this is tyranny. I did a whole boring ass video that's nearly 10 minutes of this that I will attach. But ultimately, constitutional supremacy means the Constitution is above. And if the federal is eroding away at the Constitution, how do you expect for the states who have an obedience to the Constitution under Article 6, Section 3, for us to abide by authoritarian law just because they position themselves as having that authority, right? Authoritarian law cannot change constitutional law, because constitutional law can only change upon an amendment, not upon legislation or even judicial opinion. In this recognition, the reality is that Governor Gavin Newsom, through American theory, does have lawful use of force in order to enforce state laws against federal domestic invasion and encroachments of a tyrannical government. And the fact that this would be consequential, the fact that it wouldn't be, the best way to go about it, the best way is for them to actually comply, doesn't change the fact that we had that strategy to utilize, particularly under 2A, the creation of a militia or a overseeing militia protective constitutional defense in order to be capable of ensuring that these agents are either complying, or if they do not comply, that there are consequences. If not something like jail time, then something like exiling them from the state and for them to not be capable of working inside the state of California, right? So there can be political consequences. That doesn't necessarily mean a full-on, battle. But ultimately, we do have maximum defense in this reality, and the fact that MAGA thinks that that's not realistic because their interpretation of constitutional supremacy is federal above the states is very delusional and absent of actual American founding principles. Because if you want us to believe that American founding principles are at the center of our country, then you cannot pick and choose things that only apply and benefit your discourse, when in fact the states have power when there are certain meeting of criteria, right? When it comes to California, the fact that we have 15 million Latinos, the fact that we have 40% Latinos, right? The fact that we became a state in 1850, and before that there was Spanish speaking, before that it was Hispanic, and now the Supreme Court says that no, even California, who was that before it, you fitting this criteria of being Hispanic and Spanish speaking can be considered as non-citizen, even if you are a citizen, because it's considered foreign when in fact whiteness came here afterwards. So in the case of California, California, Governor Gavin Newsom has the maximum power in order to enforce the law banning masks. Now, whether or not he uses it, that's the question, right? But ultimately, us as citizens, we have to demand it from the governor for him to not wait until 2026 in January for it to take into effect, but for him to use emergency powers to also create the mechanism in which we can enforce this new law at all consequences, because either we're going to defend the state from tyranny or we're going to be forced to become it, right? And if we can contain that and hopefully force the reduction and consolidation by becoming a nightmare for the federal, then that will work to restore the union, to restore the constitutional order. And again, this isn't about leaving the union because we dislike the Constitution. It's the federal violating the Constitution. It is because they are violating the ratification that they told California, if you enter, then we will respect who you are and who you were, and we will include you as America, right? But in saying no, what California is, its history is not America. That's positioning a reality in which you are treating us as second-class citizens and saying that our Constitution does not include us because we were not original from the colonies, right? And that recognition, we have maximum power because it's either we're part of the Union or we're not.